The horse's hooves thundered against the hard, packed earth like gunshots. And Caroline Lambert knew in that terrifying moment she was going to die. The mare beneath her had gone wild with panic after a rattlesnake crossed their path on the dusty trail outside Rhyolite, Nevada. And now Caroline clung to the saddle horn with white-knuckled desperation as the animal careened through the sagebrush. Her traveling hat had long since blown away, her carefully pinned blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. The reins had slipped from her grasp within seconds of the horse bolting, and now they flapped uselessly against the mare's neck as Caroline felt her grip weakening with each jarring stride. She tried to remember what her father had told her before he died 2 years ago, something about staying calm around horses, but terror had driven every coherent thought from her mind. The ground blurred beneath her, rocks and scrub passing in a dizzying rush. Her fingers ached from gripping the saddle, her legs burned from trying to hold on, and she knew it was only a matter of seconds before she fell. Then she heard it, the pounding of hooves coming from her left, closing fast. Through her wind-stung eyes, she glimpsed a rider on a paint horse, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of a man born to the saddle. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low over his face, a dark shirt, and leather chaps that marked him as a working cowboy. He urged his mount closer, until he was riding parallel to her runaway mare, so close Caroline could hear him talking in a low, steady voice. "Easy now," he called, though whether to her or the horse Caroline could not tell. "I am going to grab your reins, miss. You just hold on tight." He leaned out from his saddle with the kind of reckless confidence that made Caroline's heart lurch for an entirely different reason, reaching for the flapping reins. His first attempt missed, but he did not hesitate, urging his paint even closer until the two horses were nearly touching. On his second try, his gloved hand closed around the leather straps. The cowboy immediately began talking to the mare in that same calm, authoritative voice, a steady stream of words Caroline could not quite make out over the rush of blood in her ears. Gradually, miraculously, the mare began to slow, responding to the firm pressure on the reins and the soothing tone of the stranger's voice. The panicked gallop became a canter, then a trot, and finally, blessedly, the horse came to a shuddering stop. Caroline sat frozen in the saddle, her entire body shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The world seemed to tilt around her and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Easy there, miss," the cowboy said, and suddenly he was beside her, his hands reaching up. "Let me help you down." She looked down into a face that was perhaps 25 years old, weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome. His eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, warm and concerned, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. Without thinking, Caroline released her death grip on the saddle horn and let herself slide into his waiting arms. Her legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground. The cowboy caught her easily, supporting her weight as she gasped for breath, still trembling violently. "I have you," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Caroline found herself pressed against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his shirt, smelling dust and leather and something clean like soap. For a long moment she let herself stay there, drawing strength from his solidity, before propriety reasserted itself and she stepped back on shaking legs. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was going to die." "That mare was good and spooked," he agreed, keeping one hand on her elbow to steady her. "Rattlesnake," Caroline nodded, pushing her disheveled hair back from her face with trembling fingers. "It crossed right in front of us. I have never seen her react like that before." "Horses and snakes do not mix well," the cowboy said. He studied her face with those warm, amber eyes. "Are you hurt anywhere?" She took a mental inventory of herself and was surprised to find that, despite her terror, she seemed to be intact. "No, I do not think so, just shaken." "That was brave riding, holding on as long as you did. A lot of folks would have been thrown right off." He glanced back at the direction they had come. "Where were you headed?" "Back to my uncle's ranch," Caroline said, and only then did the reality of her situation fully hit her. She was miles from town, alone except for this stranger, and the very thought of getting back on that horse made her stomach turn with fresh fear. "Oh God, I cannot do this." "Cannot do what?" "Get back on." She looked at the mare, who was now standing quietly, sides heaving, seemingly as exhausted by the ordeal as Caroline felt. "I cannot get back on that horse." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Can you tell me your name, Miss Caroline Lambert?" she said. "My uncle is Thomas Lambert. He has a ranch about 5 miles west of Rhyolite." "I know Thomas," the cowboy said, and a slight smile touched his lips. "Good man. Name is Ethan Parker. I work the Crawford spread just north of your uncle's place." He pushed his hat back slightly. "Miss Lambert, you have got yourself into a tough spot here. We are a good 3 miles from anywhere, and that sun is going to be setting in a couple of hours. You need to get back on that horse." "I cannot," Caroline repeated, hating the way her voice shook. "Please, I just cannot." Ethan Parker studied her for a long moment, and Caroline had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her brave words to the fear churning in her gut. But his expression remained kind, patient. "Tell you what," he said. "How about we walk for a bit first? Let you catch your breath. Let the mare settle down some more. We will take it slow." Caroline wanted to argue that she was perfectly capable of walking all the way back to her uncle's ranch if it meant not getting back on that horse, but the practical part of her mind knew that was foolishness. 3 miles in her riding boots, in the Nevada heat, would be brutal if not dangerous. She nodded reluctantly. Ethan gathered both horses' reins and began walking, leading the animals while Caroline walked beside him. For a while neither of them spoke, and Caroline focused on getting her breathing under control, on willing her hands to stop shaking. The late afternoon sun beat down on them, but a slight breeze offered some relief, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. "How long have you been in Nevada?" Ethan asked after a while, his tone conversational. 3 months, Caroline said, grateful for the distraction. "I came from Boston after my mother passed. Uncle Thomas is my only living relative, and he offered me a home." "That is a long way to travel." "It felt like moving to another world," she admitted. "Everything here is so different, so open and wild." "Do you like it?" Caroline considered the question. "I am still deciding. There is a beauty to this land, but it is a harsh beauty, unforgiving." "That is the truth," Ethan agreed. "But there is freedom here too. Room to breathe, to make your own way. Boston is all cobblestones and crowds from what I hear." "You have never been," he shook his head. "Never been farther east than Denver. Born and raised right here in Nevada. My folks had a small ranch over near Austin until the silver played out. Lost it when I was 15. Been working cattle for other people ever since." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. Caroline found herself curious about this quiet cowboy who had appeared like something out of a dime novel to save her life. That must have been difficult, losing your home so young. "It was what it was," Ethan said with a shrug. "At least I learned a trade." "Good cowboys can always find work, especially in this country." He glanced at her. "What about you? What were you doing before you came west?" "Living a very proper Boston life," Caroline said, and could not quite keep the dry note from her voice. "Tea parties and charity functions, and trying to find a suitable husband. My mother had very particular ideas about what a young lady should be. Sounds like she did not approve of horseback riding. Caroline laughed despite herself. She tolerated it barely. Ladies were supposed to use a riding crop and look decorative, not actually develop any real skill. She sobered, looking at the mare walking docilely beside Ethan. Perhaps she was right. Clearly I am not equipped for Western riding. One spooked horse does not mean you cannot ride, Ethan said firmly. That mare panicked. Could have happened to anyone. The question is whether you are going to let one bad experience stop you from trying. I am not stopping, Caroline protested. I am simply recognizing my limitations. No, you are letting fear make your decisions for you. Ethan's tone was gentle but direct. Miss Lambert, if you cannot get back on that horse today, it is going to be 10 times harder tomorrow, and 100 times harder the day after that. Before you know it, the fear will have grown so big that you will never ride again. Caroline wanted to argue, but something in his words rang true. She had seen it in herself after her father died. The way she had let her grief keep her from living fully had let her mother's anxieties become her own. You seem to know a lot about fear. I know about horses, Ethan said, and I know that they can sense what you are feeling. If you are afraid, they get nervous. If you are confident, they settle. It is like a conversation, except you are talking with your body and your energy instead of words. They had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes, and Caroline's legs had stopped shaking. The terror had faded to a dull anxiety that sat heavy in her chest. She looked at the mare again, really looked at her, and saw an animal that seemed as tired and subdued as Caroline felt. What if she bolts again? Caroline asked quietly. She will not, Ethan said with certainty. That snake scared her, but she has run herself tired now. She just wants to get home, same as you. Caroline took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I suppose we have to do this eventually. We do, Ethan agreed, but I will be right beside you the whole way. And if you start feeling panicked, you tell me, and we will stop. It took another 10 minutes of walking before Caroline felt ready, or perhaps as ready as she was ever going to be. Ethan helped her mount, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle, and Caroline tried not to think about how safe she had felt in his arms earlier. She gathered the reins with stiff fingers, acutely aware of how the leather felt against her palms, how the mare shifted beneath her. Good, Ethan said, mounting his own horse in one fluid motion. Now take a breath and relax your shoulders. You are holding tension all through your body, and the horse feels that. Caroline tried to obey, but it was difficult. Every muscle in her body wanted to be coiled and ready to grab for safety at the first sign of trouble. Talk to me, Ethan said as they started walking, the horses side by side at an easy pace. Tell me about Boston. Boston, Caroline looked at him in confusion. I want to hear about it. What was your favorite place there? It was a transparent attempt to distract her, but Caroline found herself grateful for it. The harbor, she said after a moment. I loved watching the ships come in, imagining all the places they had been. My father used to take me there when I was a girl. What did your father do? He was in shipping, actually. Imports mostly. China, India, the Far East. He traveled extensively before he married my mother. Caroline felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders as she talked. He would bring back the most marvelous things, silks and spices and carved ivory. He taught me to love adventure, I think, even though I never went anywhere more exotic than New York. And your mother did not approve. My mother thought adventure was unladylike and dangerous. She wanted me safe and settled and married to a banker. Caroline surprised herself by laughing. She would be horrified to see me now, riding through Nevada with a cowboy I just met. Probably for the best I am not meeting her then, Ethan said, and there was humor in his voice. "I have a feeling I would not make a good impression, showing up dusty and smelling like horses." They had been riding for perhaps 10 minutes, and Caroline realized with a start that she had almost forgotten to be afraid. The horses maintained their steady walk, and Ethan kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking her questions about her life, telling her stories about the ranch where he worked. He had an easy way of talking that made her feel comfortable, made her almost forget the terror of an hour before. Almost. When a jackrabbit burst from a bush beside the trail, Caroline's heart leaped into her throat and she instinctively tensed, her hands tightening on the reins. The mare tossed her head but did not bolt, and Ethan was immediately beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. "Easy," he said softly. "You are all right, just a rabbit." The horse barely noticed. Caroline forced herself to breathe, to relax her death grip on the reins. "I am sorry." "No need to apologize. You are doing fine." His hand lingered on her arm for just a moment longer before he withdrew it. "The key is not to let your fear control the horse. When you tense up like that, you are telling her that something is wrong, that she should be worried too. You have to be the calm one, the leader. Does that make sense?" "In theory," Caroline said. "But in practice, telling myself not to be afraid is not exactly working." "Then do not try to not be afraid," Ethan said. "Just acknowledge the fear and then put it aside. Feel it and then let it go. Yes, that was scary when the rabbit jumped out. Yes, your heart is racing. That is normal. But you are still in the saddle, the horse is still walking calmly, and nothing bad actually happened." Caroline thought about that, about acknowledging fear rather than trying to suppress it. It was not what her mother had taught her. Proper ladies were not supposed to feel fear or anger or really any strong emotion. They were supposed to be serene and composed at all times, but Ethan was suggesting something different, something that felt more honest. "You make it sound simple," she said. "Simple, maybe. Easy, no." He looked at her with those warm eyes. "But I think you are tougher than you give yourself credit for, Miss Lambert. You held on during that whole runaway. That took real courage." The sun was lower on the horizon now, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The mountains in the distance stood in sharp relief against the sky, their peaks touched with purple shadow. Despite her lingering anxiety, Caroline found herself noticing the beauty of the landscape, the vast openness that had seemed so alien when she first arrived in Nevada. "How much farther to my uncle's ranch?" she asked. "Maybe a mile and a half," Ethan said. "We are making good time." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clopping of hooves, the creak of leather, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Caroline focused on Ethan's earlier advice, trying to relax into the rhythm of the horse's walk, to feel the movement rather than fight against it. It was not easy, and several times she caught herself tensing up again, but each time she consciously tried to let the fear go and trust that she was safe. When her uncle's ranch finally came into view, a collection of weathered wooden buildings clustered around a main house, Caroline felt a rush of relief, so strong it was almost dizzying. They rode into the yard, where several ranch hands looked up from their work with curious glances, and a moment later her uncle came striding out of the barn. Thomas Lambert was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. When he saw Caroline, his expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Caroline, where have you been? I was about to send someone looking for you." Then he noticed Ethan and the state of Caroline's disheveled appearance. "What happened?" "The mare spooked at a rattler," Ethan explained, dismounting and touching his hat respectfully. "Ran a good ways before I could catch up and stop her. Miss Lambert was not hurt, but it was a close thing." Thomas helped Caroline down from the saddle, his hands gentle but his eyes sharp as he examined her. "Are you all right, child?" "I am fine, Uncle," Caroline assured him, though her legs were shaking again now that the ordeal was truly over. "Thanks to Mr. Parker. If he had not stopped the horse, I do not know what would have happened." "I am in your debt," Thomas said, turning to Ethan and extending his hand. "Thomas Lambert." "Ethan Parker, sir. I work for Mr. Crawford. I know your boss, good man." Thomas studied Ethan for a moment. "Stay for supper." "It is the least we can do after you helped my niece." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Caroline, who found herself hoping he would accept. "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing, you are being thanked," Thomas said firmly. "Caroline, go inside and get cleaned up. I will have Maria set another place." Caroline nodded, though she found herself reluctant to leave Ethan's company. She had felt safe with him on the ride back, safer than she had felt since arriving in Nevada. "Thank you again, Mr. Parker, for everything." "Just Ethan, please," he said, and when he smiled at her, Caroline felt her heart do a small skip that had nothing to do with fear. "I am glad I was in the right place at the right time." Inside the house, Caroline found Maria, her uncle's housekeeper, already preparing for an extra guest. The older Mexican woman took one look at Caroline's wind-blown state and clucked her tongue. "What happened to you, child? You look like you wrestled with a dust devil." "Something like that," Caroline said, and found herself explaining the whole frightening episode while Maria helped her out of her dusty riding clothes and into a fresh dress. The housekeeper listened with wide eyes, crossing herself when Caroline described the runaway. "The Virgin was watching over you today," Maria said firmly, "and sent that young man to help. He is handsome." "No, Maria," Caroline protested, feeling her cheeks heat. "I have eyes, child, and I saw the way he looked at you when you rode in." Maria's smile was knowing. "Maybe something good comes from something scary, yes." Caroline did not know how to respond to that, so she focused on pinning her hair back into some semblance of order. But as she worked, she found her thoughts returning to Ethan Parker, to his calm competence, his gentle way of talking her through her fear. She had met plenty of young men in Boston, proper gentlemen with good families and prospects, but none of them had affected her the way this dusty cowboy had in the space of a few hours. It was just gratitude, she told herself. Natural to feel drawn to someone who had saved your life. It meant nothing more than that. But as she came down the stairs and saw Ethan standing in her uncle's front room, his hat in his hands and his hair still bearing the impression of it, looking solid and real and completely unlike any of the carefully groomed men she had known back east, Caroline felt that same skip in her heartbeat and knew she was lying to herself. Supper was a lively affair, with her uncle asking Ethan about his work at the Crawford Ranch and the state of the cattle market. Ethan answered readily, showing an easy knowledge of his trade, and Caroline found herself studying him in the lamplight, noticing details she had missed during the crisis. The way his hands moved when he talked, rough and capable. The slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. The way he listened when someone else spoke, giving them his full attention. "Caroline was just telling me the other day that she wants to become a better rider," Thomas said, and Caroline looked up in surprise because she had said no such thing. But her uncle was watching her with a knowing expression that suggested he saw more than she had realized. "Maybe you could give her some lessons, Parker. God knows I do not have the time, and you clearly know your way around horses." "Uncle Thomas, I am sure Mr. Parker is too busy," Caroline began, flustered. "Actually, I have most mornings free," Ethan said, looking at Caroline with an expression she could not quite read. "If you are serious about wanting to learn, I would be happy to help." "I do not know," Caroline said, caught between wanting to spend more time with him and the fear that still lurked in her chest at the thought of getting on a horse again. Today was rather traumatic. "All the more reason to get back to it right away," Thomas said firmly. "You cannot let fear rule you, Caroline. Your father would not have wanted that." The mention of her father struck home, as her uncle probably knew it would. Her father had always encouraged her to face her fears, to push herself beyond what was comfortable. It was one of the things she had loved most about him and lost most keenly after he died. "All right," she heard herself say, "if Mr. Parker is willing." "Ethan," he corrected again, and his smile warmed her from across the table. "And I am willing. How about we start tomorrow morning? Early, before the heat gets too bad." And so it was settled. After supper, Ethan took his leave with thanks for the meal and a promise to return at dawn. Caroline walked with him to the porch, where his paint horse was tied. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "Teach me to ride, I mean. I know my uncle can be rather forceful." "I do not do anything I do not want to do," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made Caroline look up at him. In the gathering darkness, with the lamplight from the house casting half his face in shadow, he looked almost mysterious. "The truth is, Miss Lambert, I would like to see you again. The riding lessons seem like a good excuse." Caroline's breath caught. She had been raised in a world where men made their romantic intentions known through formal calls and carefully chaperoned outings, where everything was subtle and coded. Ethan's directness was startling, even thrilling. "I would like to see you again, too," she admitted, and was rewarded by his smile. "Then I will see you at dawn," he said, mounting his horse with that easy grace she was already beginning to associate with him. "Try to get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we will start building your confidence back." Caroline watched him ride away into the darkness, one hand lifted in farewell, and stood on the porch long after he had disappeared from sight. When she finally turned to go inside, she found her uncle watching her from the doorway with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "He is a good man," Thomas said. "Honest, hardworking, knows his trade, the kind of man who does not come along often." "We only just met," Caroline protested, but her cheeks were warm. "Sometimes that is all it takes," her uncle said. "I knew your aunt was the one for me 5 minutes after we met. When it is right, it is right." His expression turned sad, as it always did when he mentioned his late wife. "You have your whole life ahead of you, Caroline. Do not waste it being afraid to live it." That night, lying in bed with the window open to the cool desert air, Caroline thought about Ethan's words on the trail. About acknowledging fear but not letting it control you. About being brave enough to try again after falling. She thought about his hands, steady and sure as he had helped her back into the saddle, and the way his voice had calmed both her and the frightened horse. Sleep was slow in coming, but when it did, she dreamed not of runaway horses and rattlesnakes, but of amber eyes and a smile that made her feel like she could do anything. True to his word, Ethan arrived just as the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Caroline was already up and dressed in her riding clothes, having barely slept. Nerves fluttered in her stomach as she walked out to meet him, but whether those nerves were about riding again or seeing him again, she could not quite say. "Morning," Ethan greeted her, and his easy smile helped settle some of her anxiety. He had brought a different horse with him, a gentle-looking sorrel mare. "Thought we would start with Daisy here instead of your uncle's mare. She is about as calm as they come. You could set off firecrackers next to her and she would barely twitch." "Is that a proven fact?" Caroline asked, trying for humor to mask her nervousness. "Well, no one has actually tried the firecrackers," Ethan admitted with a grin. "But I have ridden her through thunderstorms, past barking dogs, even past a bear once. She has got nerves of steel. They walked to the corral where Ethan had Daisy saddled and waiting. The mare looked at Caroline with big, gentle eyes and whickered softly. "First thing we are going to do is just spend some time with her," Ethan said. "I want you to touch her, talk to her, get comfortable being near her. A lot of riding is about the relationship between you and the horse. If you trust each other, everything else gets easier." Caroline approached slowly, extending her hand to let Daisy sniff her. The mare's nose was soft as velvet, her breath warm against Caroline's palm. Encouraged, she stroked the horse's neck, feeling the smooth coat and solid muscle beneath. "Good," Ethan said quietly. He was standing close enough that she could feel his presence at her shoulder, solid and reassuring. "See how her ears are forward. That means she is relaxed and interested in you. If they go back flat against her head, that is when you need to worry." "What would make them go back?" Caroline asked. "Pain, fear, anger. But you will not get that from Daisy unless you step on her foot or something." He moved to the mare's other side, running his hand down her shoulder. "Horses are prey animals, which means their instinct is always to run from danger. That is why they spook so easily. They would rather run first and ask questions later. Understanding that helps you understand their behavior." Caroline continued to stroke the horse, finding the motion soothing. Daisy stood perfectly still, occasionally turning her head to look at Caroline with those big dark eyes. "Can I tell you something?" Caroline said after a moment. "I barely slept last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that runaway horse, feeling out of control, certain I was going to fall." "That is normal," Ethan said. "Fear has a way of replaying scary moments over and over. But here is the thing: you did not fall. You held on, you survived, and today you are here trying again. That is what matters." "I do not feel very brave." "Brave is not the same as fearless," Ethan said. "Brave is being afraid and doing it anyway. Anyone can ride a horse when they are not scared. It takes real courage to get back on after what happened to you." His words helped, as did his presence. After a few more minutes of simply being with Daisy, Ethan suggested they try mounting. "I am going to help you up, and then I want you to just sit there for a bit," he said. "We are not going anywhere yet. Just sit and get used to the feeling." Caroline took a deep breath and nodded. Ethan's hands went to her waist, strong and steady, and he lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. She found herself acutely aware of his touch, even through the layers of fabric, and had to focus to push that awareness aside and concentrate on the task at hand. The saddle felt different from yesterday, or perhaps she was just more conscious of every sensation. She could feel the solid bulk of the horse beneath her, the slight shifts as Daisy adjusted her weight. Her hands trembled as she picked up the reins. "Breathe," Ethan reminded her. "You are tensing up again. Roll your shoulders back, that is it. Now take a deep breath and let it out slowly." Caroline obeyed, focusing on her breathing, trying to relax the muscles that wanted to coil tight with anxiety. Ethan kept up a steady stream of gentle instruction, telling her to loosen her grip on the reins, to sit deeper in the saddle, to let her legs hang naturally rather than gripping with her knees. "You are doing great," he said after a few minutes. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Caroline admitted. "But slightly less terrified than I expected. I will take that as a win." He moved to Daisy's head, gathering the reins. "Now we are going to walk, just a few steps. I will be leading her, so you do not need to do anything except sit there and feel the motion. All right?" "All right," Caroline said, though her heart was hammering. Ethan led Daisy forward in a slow walk, and Caroline focused on breathing through the surge of panic that wanted to take over. But the mare's gait was smooth and even, nothing like the wild galloping of yesterday, and with each step, Caroline felt a tiny bit of her fear ease. They walked around the corral like that, Ethan leading, Caroline simply experiencing the rhythm of the horse's movement. After a few minutes, some of her terror faded enough for her to notice other things: the warmth of the morning sun on her shoulders, the distant sound of cattle lowing, the way Ethan moved with an easy confidence that suggested he had been born doing this. "Tell me something," Ethan said, glancing back at her. "What made you decide to come west? Was it just about your uncle, or was there something else?" Caroline considered the question, grateful for the distraction. "My mother wanted me to marry a man named Richard Sterling. He was exactly the kind of husband she thought was appropriate, wealthy, from a good family, completely boring. When she died and left me free to make my own choices, I realized I did not want that life. I wanted something different, something bigger. Coming here was partly about my uncle, but it was also about escape. Do you regret it?" "Yesterday, during that runaway, I certainly did," Caroline said with a shaky laugh. "But no, overall I do not regret it, even with the snakes and the dust and the terrifying horses. There is something about this place that makes me feel alive in a way Boston never did." "I know what you mean," Ethan said. "The West gets in your blood, the freedom of it, the bigness. Once you have lived out here, anywhere else feels like wearing a coat that is too tight." They walked in silence for another few minutes, and Caroline felt her body beginning to relax into the rhythm of the horse's stride. When Ethan finally brought Daisy to a stop and helped her dismount, she was surprised to realize nearly half an hour had passed. "That was not so bad," she said, and was pleased to hear her voice sounded almost steady. "You did really well," Ethan said, and the warmth in his praise made her feel like she had accomplished something significant. "Same time tomorrow." "Yes," Caroline said, and found she meant it. Yes to the lessons. Yes to seeing him again. Yes to this tentative thing that was growing between them. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Each morning, Ethan would arrive at dawn with Daisy, and they would work on building Caroline's confidence. First just walking, then learning to guide the horse herself, then trotting. Each step was carefully measured, always pushing her slightly beyond her comfort zone, but never so far that she felt overwhelmed. And each day, Caroline found herself falling a little more in love with the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. It was there in the small things, the way he always made sure she was comfortable before starting the lesson, his endless patience when she struggled with something, the stories he would tell her about his life to distract her when she got nervous. He told her about growing up on his parents' ranch, about the day he broke his first horse, about the time he and his brother had gotten lost in the mountains for 3 days when he was 12. "Your brother must have been scared," Caroline said one morning as they walked side by side, Daisy following behind on a lead rope. Ethan's expression turned sad. He was only 8, cried the first night, but by the 3rd day he was having an adventure. That was Emmett's way. He could find joy in anything. He was quiet for a moment. He died 2 years later. Fever took him. "I am so sorry," Caroline said softly, touching his arm without thinking. "It was a long time ago," Ethan said, covering her hand with his own for just a moment. "But you do not forget. People you love, they stay with you." Caroline understood that. She thought of her father often, especially here in this wild place he had never seen but that she thought he would have loved. "My father used to say that the people who shape us never really leave us. They become part of who we are." "Smart man, your father." "He would have liked you," Caroline said, and realized it was true. Her father had valued competence and integrity over social standing, and Ethan had both in abundance. On their 9th morning together, as Caroline was successfully guiding Daisy through a series of turns in the corral, Ethan announced that she was ready to try riding outside. Caroline's hands tightened on the reins. "Outside? Like on the trail? Just a short ride?" Ethan said. "Nothing ambitious. But you cannot spend your whole life riding in circles in a corral, Caroline. At some point, you have to venture out again." He was right, she knew, but the thought of returning to the open trail where rattlesnakes might be waiting, where anything might spook the horse, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Still, she had come this far. Turning back now would feel like giving up. "All right," she said. "But you stay close." "I will be right beside you the whole way," Ethan promised. "We will take it slow, and if you want to turn back at any point, we turn back. No questions asked." They rode out together on a warm morning in late June, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. Ethan kept his paint horse close to Daisy, maintaining a steady stream of conversation as they followed a well-worn trail that wound through the sagebrush. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest, and she had to consciously keep reminding herself to breathe, to relax her grip on the reins, to trust the gentle horse beneath her. When a bird flew up suddenly from a bush beside the trail, Caroline tensed, preparing for Daisy to bolt. But the mare merely flicked her ears and kept walking, unperturbed. "See," Ethan said. "Nothing bothers old Daisy, she has seen it all." "I wish I had her temperament," Caroline said, trying to smile though her nerves were still jangling. "You are doing fine. Better than fine, actually." "Look around, Caroline. Look where you are." She did, and the beauty of the landscape struck her. The morning light painted the desert in gold and amber, and the mountains in the distance stood sharp against the sky. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and the air smelled of sage and sun-warmed earth. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is," Ethan agreed, but when she glanced over at him, he was looking at her rather than the landscape. Their eyes met and held for a long moment, and Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. There was something in his gaze, something warm and admiring and unmistakably interested, that made her heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, his voice low. "But I need you to know that these mornings with you have become the best part of my day. You are brave and determined and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you at the strangest times, when I am mending fence or checking cattle or lying in my bunk at night." He paused, as if weighing his words. "I would like to court you properly, if you are amenable to that." "With your uncle's permission, of course." Caroline's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her so directly about their feelings. In Boston, courtship was a complicated dance of subtle signals and social conventions. Ethan's honesty was refreshing and more than a little overwhelming. "I would like that very much," she said, and was rewarded by the smile that spread across his face, bright as the sun overhead. "Yeah," he said, and there was such hope in his voice that it made her chest ache. "Yes," she said firmly. "I have been thinking about you too at strange times. When I am helping Maria with the cooking or reading in the evening or trying to sleep, you have been there in my thoughts." "Well then," Ethan said, and his smile turned almost shy, "I guess I should talk to your uncle." They rode on, but everything felt different now, charged with new possibility. When Ethan suggested they try a trot, Caroline agreed without her usual hesitation. The faster gait was bouncy and uncomfortable at first, and she had to concentrate on keeping her seat, but Ethan coached her through it, telling her to relax her hips, to move with the horse rather than against it. By the time they returned to the ranch an hour later, Caroline was exhilarated rather than terrified. She had ridden outside, had trotted, had faced her fear and come through it intact. More than that, she had the beginning of something with Ethan, something that felt real and right in a way nothing ever had before. True to his word, Ethan asked to speak with Thomas privately that evening. Caroline tried not to pace in the parlor while the two men were closeted in her uncle's study, but it was difficult. She had no doubt what her uncle's answer would be. He clearly approved of Ethan, but the formality of it all made her nervous anyway. When they emerged, both men were smiling. Thomas clapped Ethan on the shoulder in an affectionate gesture. "Caroline," her uncle called. "Come here, child." Caroline joined them, trying to read their expressions. "Mr. Parker has asked for my permission to court you," Thomas said, his eyes twinkling. "I have given it, provided you are agreeable." "I am," Caroline said, smiling at Ethan. "Very agreeable." "Then it is settled," Thomas said, "though I expect you to continue to be a gentleman, Parker. My niece is precious to me, and I will not have her treated with anything less than the utmost respect." "You have my word, sir," Ethan said seriously. "I will always treat her with respect." That night, Ethan stayed for supper again, but this time when he left, Caroline walked him out to his horse and he took her hand in his, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and utterly charming. "I will see you tomorrow morning," he said, "for your lesson." "It seems strange to think of them as just lessons now," Caroline said. "They feel like something more." "They are something more," Ethan agreed. "They are our time together, and I treasure every minute of it." Over the next few weeks, as summer settled fully over Nevada, Caroline's confidence on horseback grew by leaps and bounds. Under Ethan's patient instruction, she learned to canter, to guide her horse through rough terrain, even to jump over small obstacles. The fear that had gripped her after the runaway never fully disappeared, but she learned to acknowledge it and then set it aside, just as Ethan had taught her that first day. But the riding lessons were only part of what was blossoming between them. Ethan began coming by in the evenings too, when his work at the Crawford Ranch was done. They would sit on the porch and talk for hours, watching the sun set over the mountains, learning each other's stories. He told her about his dreams of someday owning his own ranch, about the piece of land he had his eye on near the Carson River. She told him about her love of books, about the education her father had insisted she receive despite her mother's objections, about her dreams of perhaps teaching school someday. "You would make a fine teacher," Ethan said one evening as they sat side by side on the porch swing, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You have patience and kindness, and you are smart as a whip." "My mother always said that too much education made a woman unmarriageable," Caroline said with a rueful smile. "That men did not like women who were too clever." "Then those men are fools," Ethan said firmly. "I like that you are clever. I like that you ask questions and think about things. I like talking to you, Caroline. Really talking, not just making pleasant conversation. Do you know how rare that is?" She did know, actually. In Boston, her conversations with suitable young men had been stilted and superficial, bound by conventions about what was appropriate to discuss. With Ethan, she could talk about anything: politics, religion, her fears and hopes and dreams. He listened to all of it with genuine interest and shared his own thoughts in return. One Saturday, Ethan invited her to ride with him to a small lake he knew about 15 miles from the ranch. Thomas gave his permission, though he insisted that Maria's nephew Diego, who worked as one of the ranch hands, accompany them as a chaperone. Diego was a quiet young man in his early 20s who clearly thought the whole thing was amusing, but he kept a respectful distance as they rode, giving them the illusion of privacy. The lake, when they reached it, was a hidden jewel, tucked into a small canyon where cottonwood trees provided shade. The water was clear and cool, fed by an underground spring, and the grass along the banks was green and lush in contrast to the surrounding desert. They dismounted and let the horses drink while they spread out a blanket Maria had packed with their lunch. Diego discreetly positioned himself on the far side of the lake, within sight but out of earshot. "This place is beautiful," Caroline said, looking around in wonder. "How did you find it?" "I was tracking a stray cow about 3 years ago and stumbled across it," Ethan said. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. There is something about water in the desert that feels like a gift." They ate the lunch Maria had packed: cold chicken and bread and apples, and talked about everything and nothing. At one point, a family of ducks paddled across the lake, the ducklings following their mother in a perfect line, and Caroline laughed at the sight. "They look so purposeful," she said. "Like they have somewhere very important to be." "Maybe they do," Ethan said. He was lying back on the blanket, propped up on one elbow, watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Caroline, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? Here in Nevada, I mean." "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Caroline considered the question carefully. "I miss some things. The libraries, the museums, the ocean. But happy." She looked at him, at his sun-bronzed face and warm eyes. "I am happier than I have been in years, maybe happier than I have ever been. And that is in large part because of you." Ethan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want?" Caroline asked, her heart beating faster. "I want that piece of land by the Carson River. I want to build a ranch there, raise cattle and horses. I want a home, a real home, not just a bunkhouse where I sleep between shifts." He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "And I want to share it with someone." "With you, if you will have me." Caroline's breath caught. "Ethan, are you saying—" "Not yet," he said quickly. "I am not proposing, not today. I do not have a ring, and I want to do this properly, but I am telling you my intentions, Caroline. I am telling you that I am falling in love with you, and I want a future with you. If that is something you might want too, then I will save every penny I can to buy that land. It might take a year, maybe 2, but I am a patient man when it comes to things that matter." Tears pricked at Caroline's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she said softly, "and yes, that is something I want, very much." Ethan sat up then, both of his hands coming up to cup her face gently. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Caroline whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but pulling away was the last thing on her mind. When his lips met hers, soft and warm and tasting of apple, Caroline felt like she was flying. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a promise of all the kisses to come. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "That was worth waiting for," Ethan said, his forehead resting against hers. "It was," Caroline agreed, "though I hope we do not have to wait too long to do it again." "Well, Diego cannot see us from over there," Ethan pointed out and kissed her again. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the lake, talking about their dreams for the future. Ethan described the house he wanted to build, with big windows to let in the light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Caroline talked about having a garden, about maybe starting a small school for the children of the ranch families in the area. They were dreams that felt possible, attainable if they worked together. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up and prepared to ride back. On the return journey, Caroline noticed that she no longer felt anxious about being on horseback. Somewhere along the way, without her quite realizing when it had happened, the fear had faded. Riding now felt natural, even enjoyable, and she found herself cantering easily beside Ethan, laughing at something he said. "You know what?" she called over to him. "I think you have successfully taught me to ride without fear." "You did that yourself," Ethan called back. "I just gave you the tools. You are the one who had the courage to use them." That night, lying in bed, Caroline replayed every moment of the day in her mind. The beauty of the hidden lake, the feeling of Ethan's lips on hers, the future they had talked about building together. For the first time since her parents had died, she felt like she had something to look forward to, a life she was actively choosing rather than one being chosen for her. The summer passed in a golden haze of long days and warm nights. Caroline continued to improve her riding, and Ethan began bringing over different horses from the Crawford Ranch for her to practice on, teaching her how to adapt to different temperaments and gaits. By August, she was confident enough to accompany her uncle on his weekly trips into Rhyolite to purchase supplies, and she began to explore the country around the ranch on her own. But it was the time with Ethan that she treasured most. Their courtship continued with all the propriety her uncle required, but there were stolen moments, 2 kisses in the barn when no one was watching, hands clasped under the dinner table, long looks that spoke of longing and love. In late September, on a day when the first hint of autumn had appeared in the air, Ethan rode up to the ranch in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual. Caroline was helping Maria hang laundry when she saw him, and her heart immediately leaped with joy at the unexpected visit. "Ethan," she called, setting down the sheet she had been about to pin. "Is everything all right?" He dismounted and came to her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. Excitement, nervousness, determination all mixed together. "Can you take a break?" he asked. "I need to talk to you, and your uncle if he is around." "He is in the house," Caroline said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ethan, what is this about? You will see," he said and took her hand. "Come on." They found Thomas in his study going over the ranch accounts. He looked up in surprise when Ethan and Caroline entered. "Parker," he said, "I was not expecting you today." "I know, sir, and I apologize for interrupting," Ethan said, "but I have some news and I could not wait to share it." He took a deep breath. "I closed the deal today on that land I have been saving for. 160 acres along the Carson River with water rights and good grazing. It is mine." "That is wonderful news," Thomas said, rising to shake Ethan's hand. "Congratulations. You have been working toward this for years." "Thank you, sir." Ethan turned to Caroline, and she saw that his hands were trembling slightly. "Caroline, I know we talked about waiting until I had the land and could offer you a real home. Well, now I have it. The land is mine, and I have enough saved to start building a house come spring. It will not be fancy, at least not at first, but it will be solid and warm and ours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Caroline's heart began to pound as he dropped to one knee right there in her uncle's study. "Caroline Lambert," he said, looking up at her with those warm, amber eyes that had become so dear to her. "I love you. You are the bravest, kindest, smartest woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. It was not elaborate or expensive, but to Caroline it was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen because it was from him. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly and kissed her, propriety be damned, right there in front of her uncle. Thomas cleared his throat, but he was smiling. "I suppose I should give my official blessing," he said. "Which I do, heartily. You will take good care of each other." "We will," Caroline said, unable to stop smiling. She looked down at the ring on her finger, then up at Ethan. "I cannot believe this is real." "It is real," Ethan assured her. "You are going to be my wife, and we are going to build a life together. They set the wedding date for early December, wanting to be married before the heart of winter set in. The intervening months were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan spent his free time working on the new property, clearing land and laying the foundation for their house with the help of friends from neighboring ranches. Caroline and Maria worked on her trousseau, sewing curtains and quilts and all the things they would need for the new household. Word of their engagement spread through the community, and Caroline found herself welcomed into a network of ranch women who were eager to help the city girl turned cowboy's bride. They taught her how to preserve food for the winter, how to make soap and candles, all the skills she would need as a rancher's wife. She absorbed it all eagerly, determined to be a true partner to Ethan in their new life. On a crisp November day, Ethan took her to see the progress on the house. The walls were up, and the roof was nearly complete. It was a simple structure, 2 stories with 3 bedrooms and a large main room that would serve as kitchen and living area, but Caroline thought it was perfect. "That window there looks east," Ethan said, pointing. "You will be able to watch the sunrise from the kitchen, and that one faces west for the sunsets. I know how much you love them." "You remembered," Caroline said softly, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I remember everything you tell me," Ethan said. He took her hand and led her through the skeleton of the house, describing where the furniture would go, where her books could have shelves, where they would hang the mirror her uncle was giving them as a wedding present. Standing in what would be their bedroom, looking out the unfinished window at the land stretching away in all directions, Caroline felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be with this man, building this life. "Are you nervous?" she asked Ethan. "About being married, I mean." "Not even a little bit," he said, pulling her close. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "You not nervous," Caroline said. "Just excited, impatient for December to arrive." "Only a few more weeks," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "And then you will be Caroline Parker, and we will start our adventure together." Caroline Parker. She tried the name out silently, and it felt right, like something she had been waiting her whole life to become. The wedding took place on a clear December morning in the small church in Rhyolite. The building was packed with ranching families from all over the area, and Caroline was touched by how the community had embraced her. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Maria had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers that one of the neighbor women had preserved from the summer. Thomas walked her down the aisle, and she saw tears in his eyes as he placed her hand in Ethan's. "Take care of each other," he whispered, "and be happy." "We will," Caroline promised. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. When the minister asked if she took Ethan Parker to be her lawfully wedded husband, Caroline's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." And when Ethan said the same, pledging himself to her for the rest of their lives, she felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The kiss that sealed their marriage was proper and chaste, appropriate for a church, but Caroline could feel the promise of passion in it, the barely restrained desire they had been keeping in check during their courtship. Tonight, they would finally be alone together as husband and wife, and the thought made her cheeks flush even as excitement curled low in her belly. The reception was held at Thomas's ranch, with tables groaning under the weight of food that neighbors had contributed. There was music and dancing, and Caroline found herself passed from partner to partner as various ranchers claimed dances with the bride. But her eyes kept finding Ethan across the room, and every time their gazes met, she saw the same barely contained impatience she felt. Finally, as the sun was setting and the party was still going strong, Ethan came to claim her for one last dance. "What do you say we slip away?" he murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I have a surprise for you." What kind of surprise? The kind you will have to come with me to see. They made their goodbyes, enduring teasing and well wishes from the assembled guests, and then Ethan helped her onto his paint horse, climbing up behind her so she rode cradled in his arms. It was a beautiful evening, cold but clear, with the first stars beginning to appear overhead. "Where are we going?" Caroline asked as they rode. "I thought we would be staying at my uncle's tonight." "Change of plans," Ethan said. "I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be in our own home." "But the house is not finished," Caroline said, confused. "Not the whole house, no," Ethan admitted. "But our bedroom is done. I have been working on it every spare minute for the past 2 weeks. I wanted it to be ready for you." They rode through the gathering darkness, and when they finally reached their property, Caroline saw warm light glowing from one of the upstairs windows. Ethan helped her down and then led her inside, carrying her over the threshold of their new home. The main floor was still unfinished, open framing and bare floors, but Ethan had hung lanterns to light their way up the stairs. The bedroom was complete polished wood floors, plastered walls, glass in the windows. There was a large bed with a quilt Caroline recognized as one Maria had made, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small stove in the corner that was radiating warmth. More lanterns provided soft light, and someone, probably Maria, had scattered dried rose petals across the bed. "Ethan," Caroline breathed, looking around, "it is perfect." "I wanted our first night to be special," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "I know it is not much compared to what you are used to." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and desire into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "It is perfect because it is ours," she said firmly. "Because you made it for us. I do not need anything more than that." That night, Caroline learned what it meant to truly be joined with another person, body and soul. Ethan was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt only pleasure as he introduced her to the mysteries of marriage. And afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Caroline felt a contentment she had never known existed. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Ethan replied, his arms tightening around her. "My brave, beautiful wife." The winter months that followed were challenging but happy. Living in the partially finished house meant they had to deal with cold drafts and ongoing construction, but they worked side by side to make it a home. Ethan finished the downstairs, building a proper kitchen with a large stove and a pantry, while Caroline painted walls and sewed curtains and made the space their own. They bought cattle in the spring, building up a small herd, and Ethan taught Caroline the business of ranching. She learned to help with calving, to mend fence, to judge the quality of grazing land. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Boston, but she loved it. She loved building something from nothing, loved working alongside her husband, loved falling into bed exhausted each night and waking to a new day of possibilities. They established routines and rhythms. Morning coffee on the porch watching the sun rise. Evening rides to check the fence lines. Sunday dinners at Thomas's ranch where they would catch up on news from the area. Caroline started teaching school 3 days a week in the barn, as she had dreamed, with children from neighboring ranches coming to learn reading and arithmetic. In late summer, Caroline realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness gave it away first, then the tender breasts, and finally the missed monthly courses. When she told Ethan, he picked her up and spun her around just as he had the day she accepted his proposal, his face alight with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "You are going to be a mother." "And you are going to be a father," Caroline said, laughing at his excitement. They converted one of the upstairs bedrooms into a nursery, painting it yellow because they did not know if they were having a boy or a girl. The ranch women rallied around Caroline, bringing baby clothes they had sewn, giving advice on childbirth and infant care. Maria moved into one of the spare rooms for the last month of the pregnancy, determined to be there when the baby came. On a cold March morning, after 12 hours of labor, Caroline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Ethan was there for all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, encouraging her through each contraction. When the midwife finally placed the baby in Caroline's arms, both she and Ethan had tears streaming down their faces. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fist closed around it immediately. "Look at that grip. Going to be a rancher for sure." "What should we name him?" Caroline asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "I was thinking maybe James, after your father," Ethan said. "If that is all right with you." Caroline's tears flowed harder. "James Parker. It is perfect." Little James grew quickly, a healthy baby with his father's amber eyes and his mother's blonde hair. Caroline loved being a mother, though it was exhausting in ways she had never imagined. But Ethan was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when James would not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, then started raising horses as well, and Ethan's reputation as someone who could gentle even the wildest mount spread through the territory. People would bring their problem horses to him, and Caroline would watch him work his magic, using the same patient, calm approach he had used with her all those years ago. On the second anniversary of their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with James playing at their feet, Ethan turned to Caroline with a smile. "You remember the first time I brought you out here?" he asked. "When the house was just a skeleton." "Of course," Caroline said. "I thought it was the most wonderful thing I had ever seen." "I promised you then that we would build a life together," Ethan said. "And look at what we have now. A beautiful home, a thriving ranch, a perfect son. You have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible, Caroline." "You did the same for me," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saved my life that day, you know, not just from the runaway horse, but from a life of fear and settling for less than I wanted. You taught me to be brave." "You were always brave," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "You just needed someone to remind you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. James babbled to himself, playing with a wooden horse Ethan had carved for him. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the wind rustling through the grass. "I have something to tell you," Caroline said after a while, a smile playing at her lips. "Oh," Ethan looked at her with interest. "I am pregnant again." Ethan's whoop of joy startled James, who looked up at his parents with wide eyes before breaking into delighted laughter. Ethan scooped up both wife and son in an exuberant hug. "Another baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Our family keeps growing." "Are you happy?" Caroline asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said. "I have you, I have James. I have this land and this life. And now another baby on the way. I am the luckiest man alive." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born the following October. She had Ethan's dark hair and Caroline's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. The years flowed by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good cattle prices and mourned losses when animals were lost to weather or predators. Thomas grew older but remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on his great niece and nephew. When James was 5 and Rose was 3, Caroline gave birth to twins, another boy and girl they named Samuel and Grace. The house rang with the sounds of children playing, and Caroline often thought of her mother, wondering what she would have made of this life. Probably would have been horrified by the dirt and chaos, but hopefully would have recognized how deeply happy Caroline was. The ranch continued to prosper under Ethan's skilled management. He became known throughout Nevada as a fair dealer and an excellent judge of both cattle and horses. Men sought his advice, and Caroline was proud of the reputation he had built through hard work and integrity. She continued teaching, now in a small schoolhouse that the ranching families had built together just down the road from their property. In addition to the neighboring children, she taught James and Rose, and eventually Samuel and Grace, instilling in them a love of learning that her own father had given her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised her with a gift, a beautiful bay mare with a gentle disposition and intelligent eyes. "I thought it was time you had a horse of your own," he said, as Caroline ran her hands over the mare's silky coat. "Not one borrowed from the ranch string, but truly yours." "She is beautiful," Caroline said. "What is her name?" "That is for you to decide," Ethan said. "She is your horse." Caroline thought for a moment, then smiled. "Daisy." "I want to call her Daisy, after the horse that taught me not to be afraid." "Daisy it is," Ethan agreed. That afternoon, leaving the children with Maria, they rode out together across their land. Caroline on her new mare, Ethan on his faithful paint horse that was now getting gray around the muzzle. They rode to the place where he had first stopped her runaway horse all those years ago and sat looking out over the country that had become their home. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Leaving Boston, giving up that city life." Caroline thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, terrified and out of control on a runaway horse, and the woman she had become. She thought about her children, wild and free and brave in ways she never had been at their age. She thought about the school she taught, the neighbors who had become dear friends, the ranch she and Ethan had built from nothing. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This is where I was always meant to be, with you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they turned their horses toward home. Toward the house they had built, the children waiting for them, the life they had created together. Caroline thought about that terrifying day when her horse had bolted, and how it had led her to everything she held most dear. Sometimes, she reflected, the scariest moments lead to the greatest adventures. And sometimes being saved is just the beginning of learning to save yourself. Years continued to pass, each one adding to the tapestry of their life together. The children grew, learned to ride as skillfully as their parents, and began taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. James, at 12, could rope and brand with the confidence of someone twice his age. Rose, at 10, showed a gift with horses that reminded everyone of her father, able to calm even the most nervous animal with her presence. Samuel and Grace, the twins, were now 7 and inseparable, constantly getting into mischief together. Samuel wanted to know how everything worked and took apart anything mechanical he could get his hands on. Grace had her mother's love of books and could often be found reading in the loft of the barn, hiding from her chores. Caroline, now in her early 30s, sometimes looked at her reflection and barely recognized the frightened young woman from Boston. Her hands were rough from work. Her face had freckles from the sun despite her best efforts with bonnets, and there were laugh lines around her eyes. She was strong now, capable, able to do things that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived in Nevada. The ranch had expanded to over 500 acres, with a substantial herd of cattle and a successful horse breeding operation. They had built a proper barn, a bunkhouse for the hands they now employed, and had added on to the house twice. It was a prosperous operation, though still modest compared to some of the bigger outfits in the territory. On a warm evening in June, Thomas came for dinner as he did most Sundays. He was moving slower these days, his hair completely white, but his mind was still sharp and his affection for his family undiminished. "Uncle Thomas," James said over dessert, "tell us again about when Mother first came to Nevada." Thomas chuckled. "She was as green as spring grass," he said, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Caroline. "Did not know the first thing about horses or ranching or desert living. I remember thinking I had made a terrible mistake inviting her out here." "You did not," Caroline protested, though she was smiling. "Oh, but I did," Thomas insisted. "At least for the first few months, and then that day when the horse ran away with you and this young cowboy appeared out of nowhere to save you." He looked at Ethan with affection. "I knew then that things would work out. I saw the way he looked at you, and I saw the way you looked back. Recognized that look from when I met my Alice." "Tell us about the runaway horse, Mother," Rose begged. She had heard the story 100 times but never tired of it. So Caroline told it again, about the rattlesnake and the panic, and the feeling of being completely out of control. About Ethan appearing like something from a story, calm and capable, stopping the frightened mare. About how he had patiently taught her to ride again, session by session, until her fear had transformed into confidence. "Were you scared?" Samuel asked, wide-eyed. "Terrified," Caroline admitted. "More scared than I had ever been in my life. But your father taught me something important, that being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway." "That is a good lesson," Thomas said quietly. He looked around the table at the 4 children, at Ethan and Caroline, and his expression was one of deep contentment. "You have built something fine here, something that will last." 2 weeks later, Thomas died peacefully in his sleep. The whole family mourned him deeply, but Caroline was grateful that he had been able to see how well everything had turned out, to know his great nieces and nephews, to witness the success of the ranch and the happiness of her marriage. They buried him next to his wife in the cemetery in Rhyolite, and Caroline placed wildflowers on both graves, thanking them silently for taking in a frightened girl from Boston and giving her a home. Life went on as it always does. The children continued to grow, taking on more responsibility as they matured. James, at 15, was essentially running much of the day-to-day ranch operations alongside his father. Rose, at 13, had started helping her mother with the teaching, showing a natural gift for working with younger children. One evening, as Caroline and Ethan sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset, Ethan reached for her hand. "We should take a trip," he said suddenly. "A trip? Where?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. We have been working this ranch for nearly 15 years straight. James is more than capable of handling things for a few weeks with the help of our hands. I want to show you some of the country. Maybe ride up into the Sierras, see Lake Tahoe." "What do you say?" Caroline thought about it and realized how appealing the idea was. She loved her life, loved her children and her work, but a few weeks alone with her husband, seeing new places, sounded wonderful. "Yes," she said. "Let's do it." They planned the trip for late summer, after the spring calving was done and before the fall roundup. James was thrilled to be left in charge, and Rose promised to keep her brother from getting too full of himself. The twins were less happy about being left behind, but were consoled by the promise that they would get to stay with Maria, who spoiled them shamelessly. The trip was everything Caroline could have hoped for. They rode north into the mountains, sleeping under the stars some nights and staying in small-town hotels others. They reached Lake Tahoe on a crystal-clear day, and Caroline gasped at the beauty of the deep blue water surrounded by pine-covered mountains. "It is like something from a painting," she breathed. "Worth the ride?" Ethan asked, dismounting and helping her down. "Worth every mile," Caroline confirmed. They spent 3 days at the lake, swimming in the cold water, hiking the trails, and simply enjoying being alone together without the demands of ranch and children. On their last night, sitting by a campfire under a sky full of stars, Ethan pulled Caroline close. "I have been thinking," he said, "about how all of this started, about that day I saw you on that runaway horse. What about it? If that rattlesnake had not crossed the trail at that exact moment, we might never have met," Ethan said. "You would have ridden past wherever I was working, and our lives would have gone in completely different directions." "I prefer not to think about that," Caroline said, snuggling closer to him. "I cannot imagine my life without you." "Me either," Ethan said, "but it makes me grateful, you know. Grateful for every moment, even the scary ones, because they led me to you." "We led each other," Caroline corrected. "You taught me to be brave, but I like to think I taught you a few things too." "Like what?" "Like that it is all right to dream big, to want more than just getting by. You always had the skills and knowledge to have your own place, but I do not think you really believed you deserved it until we met." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You are right. I had gotten comfortable just working for other people, not taking risks. You made me want to reach for something more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. "Make a wish," Caroline said. "I do not need to," Ethan replied. "Everything I ever wished for is already here." They returned home to find that everything had run smoothly in their absence, though the children tackled them with hugs the moment they rode into the yard. James gave a detailed report on every single thing that had happened, clearly proud of how well he had managed. Rose had organized a surprise welcome home dinner, with all the neighboring families invited. As Caroline looked around at the assembled guests, at the community that had embraced her all those years ago, at her beautiful children and devoted husband, she felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This life she had built, this family, this home, it was more than she had ever dared to dream of back in Boston. More years passed, bringing with them the inevitable changes. The children grew into young adults. James, at 20, married a neighboring rancher's daughter named Emily, and they built a house on the western edge of the Parker Ranch. Within a year, they had given Caroline and Ethan their first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas after his great-great-uncle. Rose, at 18, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to teachers' college in San Francisco. It was a bold choice for a girl from rural Nevada, but Caroline and Ethan supported her decision. After all, Caroline herself had once left everything familiar to seek a new life. "Are you sure about this?" Caroline asked as they prepared for Rose to leave. "I am sure, Mother," Rose said. "You taught me to love learning, and now I want to learn more so I can teach better, but I will come back. This is my home." "Your father left home when he was younger than you are now," Caroline reminded her. "Sometimes leaving is part of finding out who you are." Rose hugged her mother tightly. "Did you ever regret leaving Boston?" "Not once," Caroline said honestly. "Every choice I made led me to exactly where I was supposed to be." The twins, now teenagers, showed no signs of wanting to leave. Samuel was fascinated by the mechanical marvels that were beginning to change the West, talking about motor cars and new farming equipment, while Grace had announced She wanted to be a writer and was constantly scribbling in notebooks. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw Caroline and Ethan a party. Nearly 100 people came from all over the territory, filling the yard with laughter and music. There was dancing and food and speech after speech about how much Ethan and Caroline had contributed to the community. When it was finally just family left, sitting around the fire as the stars came out, James raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us what it means to build a life worth living, to face fears, to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up on your dreams." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, raising their own glasses. Later, alone in their bedroom, Caroline stood at the window looking out over the land that had become so dear to her. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Caroline Parker," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," she replied, leaning back against him. 25 years. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like just yesterday that I saw you on that runaway horse," Ethan said. "Other days it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true somehow," Caroline said. She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you. For what?" "For seeing past my fear to who I could be, for being patient with me, for building this life with me, for loving me." "That last one was never hard," Ethan said, kissing her softly. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." As they stood there in the quiet of their bedroom, the house settling around them, Caroline thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened girl clinging to a runaway horse to a confident woman, surrounded by family and community. From someone paralyzed by fear to someone who taught others to be brave. "You still ride Daisy?" Ethan asked suddenly. Caroline laughed. "That old girl is retired now, living her best life in the pasture, but I ride every day on one of her daughters. Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking about how far you have come. From being too afraid to get back on a horse to riding like you were born to it. You should be proud of yourself." "I am," Caroline said, "but I could not have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Ethan said firmly. "The strength was always in you, Caroline. I just helped you find it." As the years continued to pass, Caroline and Ethan settled into a comfortable rhythm of life. They handed over more of the ranch responsibilities to James and his growing family while they focused on the things they loved most. Ethan spent his days working with horses, never losing his gift for gentling even the most troubled animal. Caroline continued teaching, now in a proper schoolhouse that the county had built, influencing yet another generation of children. Rose came home after 2 years in San Francisco, her teaching certificate in hand and full of new ideas. She took over the school from her mother, bringing fresh energy and modern methods while still honoring the foundation Caroline had built. And to everyone's delight, she brought home a young lawyer named William who was utterly smitten with her. The twins found their paths as well. Samuel took his fascination with mechanics and started a business repairing and selling farm equipment, becoming the go-to person in the territory for anything mechanical. Grace got several of her stories published in magazines back east, writing beautiful accounts of life in the West that made the region come alive for readers who had never seen it. On their 35th wedding anniversary, at a quiet dinner with just the two of them, Ethan and Caroline reflected on their life together. "If you could go back," Ethan asked, "to that day when your horse ran away, knowing everything that would come after, would you do anything differently?" Caroline thought about it seriously. "Not a single thing," she said. "Every moment, even the scary ones, brought us here. I would not trade this life for anything, not even to go back to Boston, to the easy life of a city lady, especially not that," Caroline said firmly. "That was not living, Ethan. It was existing. You taught me the difference." As she said it, she realized how true it was. Her life now had meaning and purpose. She had raised 4 incredible children, taught hundreds of students, helped build a community. She had loved and been loved deeply. She had faced her fears and overcome them. She had taken the broken, frightened pieces of herself and forged them into something strong. When Caroline was 60 years old, with 10 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, she wrote down her story. She called it simply A Journey West, and she wrote it not for publication but for her descendants, wanting them to know where they came from and what it had taken to build the life they now enjoyed. She wrote about the girl who had come from Boston, unsure and afraid, about the runaway horse that had almost killed her, about the cowboy who had saved her life and then taught her to save herself. She wrote about the lessons she had learned about facing fear, about the power of patience and persistence, about the importance of building something meaningful. And she wrote about love, not the dramatic, sweep-you-off-your-feet love of novels, but the steady, enduring love that shows up every day, the love that holds your hand through difficult moments and celebrates your triumphs, the love that sees you at your worst and chooses you anyway, the love that builds homes and raises children and creates legacies. On a warm spring morning just after their 40th anniversary, Caroline woke to find Ethan already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out over their land as he did most mornings. His hair was white now, and he moved slower than he once had, but to Caroline he was still the handsome cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, joining him at the window. "Everything," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. 40 years we have been married, Caroline. 40 years of building this life together. And I was just thinking that if I had to do it all over again, I would not change a thing, except maybe I would have kissed you sooner." Caroline laughed, the sound clear and joyful. "You kissed me plenty soon enough." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the land in shades of gold. Below them, they could see James and his oldest son riding out to check the herd. In the distance, smoke rose from Samuel's workshop, suggesting he was already hard at work. Somewhere in the house, they could hear the voices of visiting grandchildren. "We built something good here," Ethan said quietly. "We did," Caroline agreed. "Something that will last long after we are gone." That afternoon, they rode out together, something they still tried to do at least once a week. Caroline on a gentle mare, Ethan on a horse descended from his old paint. They rode to their favorite spot, a rise that overlooked the whole ranch, and sat side by side watching the clouds cast shadows across the land. "You remember the first time we came here?" Ethan asked. "When I brought you to see the land before we were married." "I remember everything about those days," Caroline said. "How nervous I was, how certain I was that I could not do any of this, and you just kept believing I could." "Because I could see it in you," Ethan said. "The strength, the courage, the determination, they were always there, Caroline. You just needed someone to help you see them yourself." As they rode back to the house in the gathering dusk, Caroline thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become, about the journey from fear to confidence, from running away to running toward, about the unexpected directions life could take when you were brave enough to let it. That night, surrounded by family at dinner, Caroline looked around the table at the faces she loved most in the world. Her children, grown and confident and good. Her grandchildren, wild and free and full of promise. And beside her, his hand warm in hers under the table, the man who had taught her that love and courage often look like the same thing. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan. "For what?" "For saving me. And then teaching me to save myself." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Thank you for building this life with me, for being brave enough to try. As the evening wore on, filled with laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of a large family, Caroline felt a deep sense of peace. This was what mattered. This was what endured. Not the fear, not the falling, but the getting back up. Not the moment of rescue, but the lifetime of partnership that followed. The sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in impossible colors, and Caroline Lambert Parker, once a frightened girl on a runaway horse, now a woman who had built an empire of love and family and community, smiled. The journey had been long and sometimes hard, but it had been worth every step. And as Ethan squeezed her hand and smiled back, his eyes still that same warm amber that had first captured her heart 40 years ago, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that she would choose this life, this love, this man, over and over again, for all eternity. The years that followed were gentle ones, full of the quiet contentments of a life well lived. Ethan and Caroline grew older together, their steps slower but their love undimmed. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own, the family tree spreading wide and strong. Caroline continued to write, documenting not just her own story but the stories of the community, preserving the history of how the West was won not through violence but through determination, hard work, and the courage to keep trying even when afraid. Ethan remained a master horseman until the end of his days, his gift for understanding horses undiminished by age. People still brought their troubled animals to him, and he would work his quiet magic, always with Caroline nearby, watching with the same admiration she had felt on that first day so many years ago. On a clear autumn morning, just after their 50th wedding anniversary, they rode out together one last time to their favorite spot. Ethan's health had been failing, and they both knew this might be their last ride together. They sat on the rise overlooking the ranch, holding hands, remembering. "Thank you for a beautiful life," Ethan said, his voice soft but steady. "Every moment with you has been a gift." "The gift was mutual," Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything. A home, a family, a life beyond anything I had imagined. You taught me to be brave." "You were always brave," Ethan said. "From that first moment, holding on to that runaway horse with everything you had, I just helped you see it." They sat together as the sun arced across the sky, not needing words, just being together in the land they had claimed and made their own. And when they finally rode back to the house, moving slowly, Caroline knew she was storing up this memory, this perfect day, to sustain her through whatever came next. Ethan Parker died peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, with Caroline holding his hand. He was 73 years old and had lived a life of purpose, integrity, and love. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from across Nevada, all of whom had been touched by his kindness, his skill, or his unwavering decency. Caroline mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the stories they told about him, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 12 years, active and engaged until the very end, teaching her last class at the age of 83. When Caroline Lambert Parker died on a warm spring morning, surrounded by her family, her last words were reported to be, "I am not afraid." And she was not. She had spent a lifetime learning not to let fear control her, learning to face each challenge with courage and grace. She had learned from the best teacher, a dusty cowboy who had stopped a runaway horse, and then patiently taught the terrified rider that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. They buried her next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built, under a sky so blue it seemed to go on forever. The headstone, chosen by her children, read simply, "Caroline Lambert Parker. She learned to ride without fear. The ranch continued for generations, run by their descendants, a living testament to what two people could build when they chose courage over fear, partnership over independence, and love over everything else. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the sun was setting over the mountains and painting the sky in gold, ranch hands would swear they could see two riders on the distant hills, riding side by side, together forever in the land they had made their own. The story of the frightened girl and the cowboy who saved her became family legend, passed down through the generations. Each new Parker child would hear it, would learn the lessons it contained about facing fear, about getting back up after falling, about the transformative power of love and patience. And though the West changed, though motor cars replaced horses and electric lights replaced lanterns, and the wild frontier became settled towns and cities, the core truth of their story remained constant. That sometimes the scariest moments in our lives lead us to exactly where we were always meant to be, and sometimes being saved is just the first step on the journey to saving yourself. In the end, that was the greatest lesson Caroline Lambert Parker had learned, and the greatest gift she gave to those who came after, the understanding that we are all stronger than we know, braver than we believe, and capable of building beautiful lives even when we start from a place of fear. All we need is someone to believe in us until we learn to believe in ourselves, and the courage to get back on the horse and ride toward the horizon, trusting that the journey itself will teach us everything we need to know.